Okay, so hi, I'm Debbie, and this is my thesis presentation. My thesis addresses the influence of leadership and communication on learning within an organization by direct mutual interactions in the dyads. This is done in combination with multi-level organizational learning as an alternative route, which includes feed-forward and feedback learning. So first, I'll start a little bit by explaining the theoretical background. Then I'll talk about a real-world scenario. After that, the self-modeling network modeling approach used. Then the second-order adaptive network model, the simulation results, the conclusion and discussion, and finally the limitations. So the concept of multi-level organization is not new, but the combination with artificial intelligence is still quite new. Organizational learning is a shared knowledge development process involving individuals, groups, and the organization. It occurs firstly through the exchange and formation of shared mental models between team or project members, and secondly, through the institution of these shared mental models on the organizational level for future use. This process is referred to as feed-forward learning. Learning also occurs in the feedback direction when the institutionalized learning and the shared mental models are being transferred and used by teams and individuals. Using computer simulations, we can determine the quickest and most efficient way to share knowledge. In this research, we will look at 4 different models based on active and inactive team leader, as well as a high or low extent of natural communication. So we will start by explaining a little bit of background knowledge. The first step is about mental models, but specifically shared mental models. A mental model represents events and processes from the world and include information we know as well as our beliefs. Through a person's mental manipulation or internal simulation, mental models are capable of understanding and explaining phenomena and thus react appropriately. Mental models can rely on 3 assumptions. The first being that each mental model represents a possibility. Secondly, is the principle of truth, meaning that the mental models represent what is true according to the premises, but by default not what is false. And lastly, that deductive reasoning depends on mental models. When working in teams, every person has an individual mental model, but they will form a shared mental model together. These shared models combined with beliefs are important in organizational learning. Next, I will explain a little bit about organizational learning. Humans have the ability to act in groups and through joint action. In such joint action, the group creates a set of intersubjective meanings that are expressed in their communication, either verbal or non-verbal, or through acts or even objects. Communication includes metaphors, myths, etc. These are shared within the group. New members will initially have little to no idea of the communication within that group, but with time they will learn. And organizational learning looks at how people learn from other people and their experience. In parallel, individuals simultaneously adapt their behavior based on organizational routines and processes. There are 3 observations that form organizational learning. The first being routines and process. The first being that organizational behavior is based on routines. Secondly, actions made by organizations are often history dependent. And lastly, organizations are oriented to targets. Organizational learning is considered to be a multi-level phenomenon that involves individuals, teams, and organization and connections between these 3, as can be seen here. This learning process works in feed-forward and feedback directions. Feed-forward learning means that an organization can learn from individuals and teams, and feedback learning refers to the utilization of already existing and institutionalized knowledge, and sharing this with the individuals and teams. Features of individual memories have an influence on the organizational learning, and the formation of the shared mental model is usually part of organizational learning, and specifically feed-forward organizational learning. The last piece of background information is about leadership. There is an established link between leadership and organizational learning. In a study conducted in 1939 by psychologist Kurt Lewin, there were 3 different styles of leaderships identified. I will explain them very shortly. The first one is authoritarian. Here, the leadership provides clear instructions of what is needed and expected. Participative, this leadership involves a leader who is very involved with the group and involves other members in the decision making, as well as providing guidance when needed. Delegative focuses on the delegating initiative to team members, and recently some more leadership styles have been added. For example, transformational. In these groups, the leaders inspire their followers, and transactional. This is often seen in work environments with an employer and an employee. The employee has a role of a follower in exchange for compensation, which is often money. So next we'll go to the real world scenario. This is the scenario on which my thesis was based. It's based on a case described by Amy C. Edmondson, which looks at the role of learning within teams. This is done by observing several teams, and the collective learning process is investigated by looking at the team's reflection and action. In the paper, an organization with 12 different teams organized in 5 different team types. These teams were divided into 3 groups. Group 1 being reflection and action, group 2 being reflection without action, and the last group was neither reflection nor action. We picked a team called Product Development Team because they had teams in both group 1, which was reflection and action, and team 2, which was reflection without action. These teams were discussed in depth in Edmondson's paper, and therefore I felt like it would be the most realistic when simulated, because we could provide a lot of information without having to assume a lot of things. In this way, we created the following situation. There's a team whose job it is to promote a new product. The relevant team member in this situation are the team leader, the marketing consultant, the designer, and the financial representative. The marketing consultant suggests a billboard as a way to advertise a new product, while the designer suggests social media. For both ideas, there's money needed from the financial representative, and the team leader suggests that both members talk to the financial representative. You can't see it very well, but this upper formula is the formula for canonical differences, and there are several characteristics in a network model, namely connectivity characteristics. These refer to connections and their weight between states, which can be seen in these formulas. Oh, sorry. Aggregation characteristics, and this calculates the impact from incoming connections and timing characteristics. This is the speed factor. And these functions, these lower functions, are used in the self-modeling network model. Realistic networks models are usually adaptive. This is because both their states and network characteristics change over time. By using a self-modeling or reified network, and similar network-oriented conceptualization can be applied to adaptive networks. So to obtain a declarative description using mathematically defined functions and relations for them as well. The second order adaptive network model, it addresses the effect of communication and leadership on learning within an organization. Communication can occur by either natural communication or communication organized by the team leader. In this paper, natural communication is described as communication that happens naturally without extra encouragement from the team leader within a team. Before we started the simulations, we made several assumptions, namely that natural communication is either completely off, which is low, or completely on, which refers to high. This natural communication can be adjusted for every diet. Secondly, the level of encouragement from the team leader to communicate is also a spectrum. Communication within a team member in diets, as well as the relations between team members, can be adjusted by the team leader. There's also a spectrum from feedback and feed-forward learning. If other than that, if the team leader states that something will happen, it will happen. That means that nobody overrules the team leader. And finally, this simulation by the model follows 3 phases, and these phases do not overlap. The first phase is the natural communication and the team leader interactions. This is time 20 to 60. Here, employees are learning by mutual interactions in dyad. The second phase is feed-forward learning. This is time 60 to 120, and this is where the shared mental model is formed. And lastly, there is feedback learning. This is time 140 until 180. The connectivity can be shown in this graph, which is very confusing, so I won't bother you too much with the details. But yeah, as you can see, there's communication, there's a connectivity in between all the layers, as well as in between layers. So we made 4 different scenarios. Firstly, we made the base scenario. Here is neither an active leader nor a high level of communication. This can be seen in, for example, a temporary team or where the team leader has a negative effect on natural communication. Secondly, we have an inactive team leader, but a high natural communication. This can be seen in, for example, the delegative leadership style. And this, an example of real world is where a team leader trusts their team completely and trusts their team members to come to them if they have an issue. Thirdly, we have an active team leader, but a low level of communication. This is often seen with a transactional or authoritarian leadership. And this can be a new team with an experienced team leader, where the team leader does know what he or she is doing, and the team members are still very inexperienced and need a lot of communication with the team leader. And fourth, we have both an active team leader and a high natural communication. This can be seen in a participative or transformational leadership. Examples of this could be where the team members and the team leader are very familiar and they already trust each other and therefore find it easier to communicate. Okay, so this is the simulation of scenario 1. As you can see, there's no communication in the first place, which is this part. Thus, there's also no learning. The learning only starts in phase 2, which is here. You can see that a lot of lines are going up here. This learning is only feed-forward organizational learning. Thus, here the organization is learning, but the team members are not yet learning. That only starts in phase 3, which is here. So scenario 2 has an inactive team leader, but a high natural communication. Because of this, the team members are already learning during phase 1, as you can see, in compared to scenario 1. Scenario 2 has a lot more lines that go up here. Sorry. In addition, organizational learning happens in phase 2, similar to scenario 1. However, since the team members already have a good communication, the knowledge is already shared, and there's not a lot of feedback learning. Similar to scenario 2, the team members are already learning in the first phase. This is because the team leader makes sure there's a communication within the team. Because of this, the team members are already learning in phase 1, and in addition, the information learned by the organization through feed-forward learning in phase 2. So very similar to scenario 2. Then lastly, scenario 4, with both an active team leader and an active natural communication. Comparable to the previous 2 scenarios, in this scenario, learning is also happening in phase 1. In this case, communication can happen naturally or through the team leader. This ensures that there's enough communication between the team member to establish a shared learning process in phase 1. In phase 2, this knowledge is shared with the organization during the feed-forward learning. And finally, in phase 3, the feedback learning is updating the individual mental models as far as needed. So the results show that when good communication is present, either due to the team leader or due to natural communication or both, this can lead to faster learning processes within an organization. However, this is a more direct form of learning, and in general, this take more time of the employee's time, as a quadratic number of dyadic interactions in general requires a more invested time than a linear number of interaction needed for feed-forward and feedback learning. Learning between team members takes place when there's at least one basis for communication. In the three-letter scenarios, the graph was quite similar. They only differs in a way that cannot be seen in these graphs. When there's only an active team leader, this person is often seen as the boss and treated as such. This team leader is very important because they make sure that everything that needs to be done, will be done. However, this can lead to the hierarchical mom effect, which is defined as individuals' reluctance to provide negative feedback to another for fear of being associated with a message. This means that people are less likely to say something to their supervisor, even if it's at the expense of task accomplishments, because they want to maintain a positive relationship. This can be seen specifically in work relationships. Another factor is that team members are more likely to expect negative feedback from their team leader than their team leader is expecting negative feedback from them. This may negatively influence the team members in expressing their opinion. Other research has shown that when there's a two-way symmetrical communication system, which also includes internal team peer communication, the likelihood of employees' job satisfactions increase, as well as their participation and commitment. Internal communication helps team leaders connect with their members, and thus help the organization with bettering its environment. So the presence of an active team leader as well as natural communication leads to a more satisfactory work experience. When there's only a high level of natural communications, team members may learn a lot from each other, but things could still be missing. Like mentioned before, a team leader is important because they ensure that everything that needs to be done will be done. And when this responsible person is missing, it could be that some things are missed or stay undecided. Thus, even though these three scenarios had to an extent the same outcome, there still could be differences that are not shown in the graph. The result of this being a computational model leads to the fact that it does not fully cover reality. There might be other factors important in an organization that might influence the learning processes. Examples of this are the amount of people in the organization, the relationship for each individual dyad, the type of project they are working on, etc. The list goes on and on. It's not suitable to create a real-life experiment out of this. This is because some scenarios, like an inactive team leader and low natural communication, could lead to hostile work environments. And for further research, I would like to see what differentiations within a model could be made. For example, two co-workers have a high level of natural communication between them, but not with another co-worker. For sake of simplicity, this was not addressed yet, but further research will also look at larger teams or more layers within a team. These are the sources that I used, and this was my presentation. Thank you for listening.